Hi, this is the Watersheds at Work podcast brought to you by Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. My name is Corey Alaniz and I'll be your host. For those of you not familiar with the Watershed Council, we are a nonprofit group in northern Michigan dedicated to protecting our pristine waters through education, prevention, and research. This is the first episode of our new podcast with our executive director, Katie Wolf. This episode will cover what we do as a Watershed Council, who we interact with, why you should care, and the goals we have to keep our lakes and waters clean. I hope you enjoy. Who are you and what's your role at the Watershed Council?
I'm Katie Wolf and I'm the Executive Director for the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, and I've been here a full year as of yesterday.
Wow, congratulations.
So my background, I have a science and communications background education-wise with my bachelor's in biology and English and my master's in communications, and have spent my 30-plus career working with nonprofits, particularly in the environmental, science, and technology arena. I had a few detours in the human investment and humanities area, but have always really enjoyed working with organizations that had a very strong connection with their communities or volunteer networks, and helping to build those organizations and do good things.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what is the Watershed Council and what does that mean to the public?
The Watershed Council is an interesting title because people often think that we're affiliated with a government agency. And the Watershed Council has a really neat grassroots history where it evolved out of some students' work with the University of Michigan's Biological Station and some of the leadership affiliated with that. And so we have a really strong local connection there with that station. And the role of the Watershed Council, which is replicated around the country now, is where we focus very specifically on water quality. And so when we look at projects we take on, we look at, does this project really have an impact on water quality? So that's a defining framework for the work that we do. And so every aspect of water quality you can think about, pretty much, we're involved.
So with that being said, what is the overall mission then, at least for the long term, for the Watershed Council?
Well, we have our formal mission, and we often refer to us as being a voice for our fresh waters in northern Michigan. And we cover right now officially a 4-county area, but because there's 5 major watersheds in there that we carefully monitor, that expands. I think we touch into like 8 different counties. So we define it as we cover 2,500 miles of rivers and streams. We have several blue ribbon trout streams in that area. We have 14 lakes that are larger than 1,000 acres, which are very large.
Yeah.
We have 38 lakes that are between 100 and 1,000 acres. And it's just fun to say these numbers because it's pretty vast. And then we have 184 lakes between 10 and 100 acres, 1,600 lakes less than 10 acres. And then that also includes 363,000 acres of wetlands. So that gives you a sense of our footprint. The counties we cover are Antrim, Charlevoix, Sheboygan, and Emmett, but we also touch into surrounding counties.
That's a lot of water to protect. I mean, it's amazing just to have that much of a spread, and they're all pristine, beautiful lakes up here in northern Michigan.
Well, and that's just the water we can see because we also focus on groundwater. And I guess that's something we should calculate is the volume of groundwater and the aquifers that we cover. But that's a whole nother dimension that we're very concerned about. And particularly with so many freshwaters here and so many homes being around the rivers and streams and the inland lakes and the Great Lakes, and so many of those using septic systems. The groundwater is an important issue, but also septic systems, if they're not working properly, could potentially go into our freshwaters like the Great Lakes. And so that's another area that we delve into.
Absolutely. And what other aspects are you looking to protect within all these lakes and watersheds?
So going back to our mission and the expansive things that we do, we look at both the public policy arm of things as well as the water quality monitoring and education. And then with each watershed, we have a plan that goes along with that. So those are some of the dimensions that we cover. And in addition to that, we have to raise money to support these efforts. So we have an arm of our operations that's very dedicated to our membership and raising money through donations as well as grants. So everything we do is focused on within a watershed, and so there's a Watershed Advisory Council, but then we also have to look at right now, to be able to take on some of these major projects, we have to have the funding to do that. And with the way government works now and how funding isn't necessarily trickling down at the local level, oftentimes before we can start a project, we have to be able to identify grant dollars that we can help bring to that community because they don't have budgets that allow for some of these major infrastructure projects. So not only do we identify the sources of the problems and the challenges, but we try to bring funding with us to local communities so that we can be able to have that impact on thousands of people every year.
Yeah, most definitely. And so how do we work with the watershed advisory committees to help come up with what we want to work on in our areas or on our specific watersheds?
So it's definitely a very community-driven process because you have to have the stakeholders involved. So we work with what are referred to as watershed advisory councils, and those people are all volunteers who are strong stakeholders in their watershed. And so a watershed is taking the high points geographically and then everything that drains in to the lowest point or the water basin for that watershed. And so looking at other environmental groups, local officials, volunteers, lake associations, homeowners, those people who tend to be the major stakeholders for water quality in their community. And so we regularly meet with those councils, and particularly there is a structure for establishing a watershed through a management plan. So that's the first thing. And to develop that watershed management plan requires a lot of intensive surveying and sampling and looking at the shorelines and identifying what are all the moving parts in this community that's affecting water quality. So once all of that data is collected, then it's identifying what are those significant water quality issues, and then the community helping to set those priorities. And so once those plans are put together, which takes a couple years to do, then they're submitted to the state of Michigan with the environmental department there, and they have to review it. And then once they review it, it actually goes to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for final review. So then once it's approved, they have their official watershed management plan, and that enables us to apply for what they call implementation grants. And that's again looking at those priorities and looking at those projects that are the most pressing and applying for funding to address those issues. So it's a pretty involved process, but the good thing about it is it really does engage those local stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how long do those management plans last?
Well, every 5 years, we have to resubmit to kind of reevaluate, reassess, make sure that a lot of things can happen in 5 years, especially in this part of the state and when water is involved, because the level of development happening around water bodies is really significant. And so, every 5 years, we have to update that information and reassess what those priorities are, submit those updated plans to the state, and those go through a review process again. So it is a continual loop.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the people that we work with in the groups. So who are those people involved in that? And is it local people that make up those partners? Can you describe a little bit more in depth on who those people are and what they mean to us?
I find that part of my work here to be one of the most inspiring, because the level of dedication from the local communities for their water resources is just really compelling. I've had the opportunity to work in all parts of Michigan through my career, as well as at a national level in a different state. And I'm just very inspired by the strong commitment that Northwest Michigan has to its water resources. And I would say anybody really can be involved. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that we have elected officials and people in leadership positions. But if you're a homeowner living along a stream or a lake, or just a very concerned individual, there's a place for you to be involved. So it's not exclusive. I would say it's more of an inclusive process. And looking at different communities, making sure we're working closely with the tribes, other environmental groups, we try to be very inclusive in that process.
Yeah. And so how can those individual members either get involved with who they elect, or how can they get involved with us? And why is that?
That's a very, very important question, and something that I think is more important now than ever. Having people who are well informed and deeply care about our fresh waters, having them get involved in locally elected positions is absolutely critical, because it's complicated. Caring for our waters is not always an easy thing to do. You have to deal with looking at those people who tend to be more vocal than others, and then before you know it, you have development happening in places that could pose major threats to the quality of our water. So it isn't an easy task, but it's such a critical one to think. People often say, I want my children and my grandchildren to be able to enjoy these fresh waters as I have when I was a kid and with my grandparents. Well, in order for that to happen, the upcoming generations have to be willing to put the time and energy and their expertise at work to make sure that we care for our water quality for generations to come. And that's a real issue now, is getting really well-informed, committed people to fill those positions.
Yeah. And so can you give a general person who doesn't know much about this an idea on how they can get information to either find out more about that or elect officials?
Well, I would say the first thing they want to do is call the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, become a member, and explore our website. Our website, watershedcouncil.org, has volumes of information that we're told it's one of the best sources to go for historical information on our watersheds in northern Michigan. But the staff here are really incredible, definitely willing to address people's questions. Sometimes we may not have all the answers at our fingertips, but we'll do the research to find the answers, the best answers available at that particular time. So that's a great place to start. But I think also looking at your local ordinances, and you can refer to those ordinances based on things like shoreline development, your septic code. There's also resources with the health department and then at the state level. So it does take some homework, but I think the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council's website is a great place to start. Or you can come into our office, and we have a lot of great printed resources as well. If you're more of you like the printed version, we've got some great resources there. We have phenomenal webinars. I think our Icebreaker series this year, we're breaking some records, but really we strive to have some of the top experts in Michigan, but also they have national and international reputations to pick up and to discuss timely topics. And after those online presentations, you can participate from wherever you want, because you can bring it right into your home electronically. There's a good Q&A session there. And then we find that also leads to us taking on new projects because of the participation in those webinars.
Yeah, most definitely. And thank you for that, because I know for some people, just trying to navigate and figure out all these different ordinances and rules can be a little bit overwhelming. But we have access to lake associations and a lot of people in the community that we can really direct.
Absolutely. And our lake associations are huge, critical partners for us. We work very, very closely with them. Again, I'm very impressed with the caliber of people who are involved in their commitment to their lakes and water bodies. We also have a huge team of volunteers that help drive and so expand what we're able to do. We're a relatively small staff covering a large footprint, and so 200 plus volunteers help with our lake and stream monitoring, but also get involved in other ways. We have volunteers who come in here and help us with our mailings or help cover events and plan events. So there's so many ways that volunteers can get involved in our organization.
Yeah. And do you have any quick recommendations on how they can get involved, or what's the process like for that?
You can email us at info@watershedcouncil.org, and that will get you into the right loop. Those emails channel your inquiries to the right person on staff, and we have several people who coordinate volunteers depending on what your interests are. And so that'll get you started, or you can pick up the phone and call, or you can stop by our office in Petoskey.
Perfect. What are some of the benefits for people who do also volunteer? Do you have anything that comes to mind as far as how that can help them learn even more and get exposed to?
Oh, sure. I don't think you can volunteer for Tip of the Mitt without opening your eyes to a whole new world of what's right outside of your backyard. So as a stream or lake monitor, you learn a lot about what are the water quality indicators. So what are the type of insects and aquatic life in that particular habitat that indicates good water quality? And what are those things that indicate that we've got a problem? And so you learn all of that information hands-on, plus you get to work with incredible people. Some of our volunteers have been dedicated for over 25 years. So that's a lot of expertise there. So, if you want to gain an appreciation for your local aquatic habitat, it's a great way to learn that information and contribute, because all of the data that our volunteers collect not only benefits our data collection here, but it also becomes incorporated statewide into a statewide database. So you're truly helping give people that full picture of the status of our water quality.
Yeah, it's nice to know that people's work are getting promoted and used in the correct way to help the environment. And also just for the fact of being able to network with other people.
And it's a good thing to know about just how clean is the water that you're fishing in or bathing in or drinking or what have you, because we're all connected to that food chain, and eventually what's in that water ends up on your plate. And so having that personal hand in making sure that it's clean makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And so we're here right now and we're having watershed management plans and everything, but where do we see us heading in the future? What's our goals as a Watershed Council?
Oh, there's so many exciting things happening within the Watershed Council. But I would say some of the pressing issues that we're looking at, there was a lot of attention over the years given to plastics in the ocean, which, our Great Lakes are connected to the ocean. What we've realized now is that plastic pollution is having a significant impact on the Great Lakes, as well as in our groundwater and inland lakes and streams. So I see that as an area that we will be addressing more, because there's so many things that everybody can do to help address that problem. Just by making some simple changes in your daily life, you can have a huge impact in making sure that our waters are less burdened with plastics. Plastics are everywhere, and they play a critical role in our economy and in healthcare. There are a lot of things plastics are important to, but I think there's also a lot of research in looking at how do we create materials that don't break down and then cause significant problems, not only for human beings, but for our aquatic habitats.
Right.
So that's one area. I think the other really significant area that we'll be looking at, and we already are addressing, is the contamination of our water bodies from septic pollution. We have a lot of septic systems that are not up to code, that have been working for way too many years without being regularly maintained. And so that's a big issue statewide. Michigan is the only state without a statewide septic code, so that's something we hope to address at a policy level. With all the water bodies we have and the groundwater resources we have here of all states, we should be leading in that direction. And so that's something we'll be pushing pretty hard for. Also is making our communities resilient to extreme weather. That will be a growing concern. Stormwater runoff is always a significant issue here. The potential for flooding as well as carrying pollutants into our water bodies. But as we experience more extreme weather conditions right here in northern Michigan, then we need to make sure our communities have the infrastructure in place to be able to handle those extreme conditions. So that's something we'll definitely be working on too.
Yeah. Can you tell people a little bit on what type of projects we have going on right now, like what's new and what we have currently in the works that might help lead us to those goals?
Well, I think that some of the things that I find really exciting, it's all pretty cool, but the work that we've been doing with shoreline restoration. We had a lot of damage to our shorelines when the lake levels were elevated, and so people are still addressing those. A lot of flooding and erosion, so that's been an issue. But we've also had a substantial amount of development right along our shorelines. And so we're really working with communities to have them adopt green belts and restore their shorelines using nature-based solutions, because those are the best ways to be able to prepare for when we get those really strong winds and waves and high levels of water, to protect those shorelines. So some people want to have that perfect lawn that goes all the way to the shoreline, but that's really not in the long run in the best interest of our lakes and streams, because not only it takes oftentimes fertilizer and pesticides to create those manicured lawns, and then you lose that natural vegetation that has those deeper roots and help protect those shorelines from eroding. So this past year, we did 2 major shoreline restoration projects, and in that process helped train area contractors so that they can also be aware of those best practices. There's a perception that some of the work that you can do naturally to strengthen and shore up, so to speak, our shorelines are not as strong and protective of the shorelines as adding seawalls and boulders. But what we know through bioengineering is that they absolutely can be every bit as effective. And not only that, they're good for the local habitat. And we've got examples where we've put in those shorelines, and 15 years later, they are all naturalized and holding up. So I think that's something I'm very excited about. Watching that process in place, watching all the contractors work side by side with our staff and really restore a shoreline overnight, so to speak, within one day's work. It's exciting to see the teamwork happen there, but also to see the results and know that's going to be a beautiful, naturally vegetated area and be very friendly to frogs and turtles and mink and otters and different types of critters that need that shoreline.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to work with Mother Nature and then have the benefits to see the beauty that it gets to show off in the end. And on top of that, besides just pesticides and fertilizer being on our lawn, it helps keep the lake healthier because those aren't going into it, it's not causing algae blooms. That could help keep the water more enjoyable.
Now, those natural shorelines filter all of those pollutants. And so it's a really critical way of making sure that our water bodies are protected for future generations.
Absolutely. Well, this is all such great information, Katie. I really appreciate you taking your time to dive in on this. And so this is our new and upcoming podcast. And I guess the last question I have is just a brief overview on why we're doing these series and what you hope to get out to the community.
Well, Corey, I would really like to recognize you, and you're taking the lead with these podcasts, because we have people tell us all the time, once they start peeling the onion to better understand what the Watershed Council is, they're like, wow, I had no idea you all did all of that. So that's really the driving force behind the podcast, is to help people understand all the different things that we are able to work with communities together to help achieve on behalf of our fresh waters. And so I think getting to meet some of the personalities by having these podcasts with a variety of our staff, and as we move along, we'll engage more of our stakeholders within the different watersheds that we work on, so that it just will become a really rich body of information for people to better understand all the moving parts that it takes to protect our shorelines. And there's a lot to it.
There is, and that's definitely what I want to do, is just help the general public understand what's going on. There's so many different nuances throughout this, and so our hope is to explore all this, but a lot of times we might forget to cover something, so if people want to chime in and email us and send us their questions. We're happy to take a look at those topics and cover them.
Because we've really just kind of covered the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. We haven't even begun to get into aquatic invasive species and the mobile boat washing program that you're so involved in. And there's so many different aspects. And I know this summer we will have some great events. There's going to be opportunities for people to participate in cleanups and then the stream and lake monitoring training. There's so many other things. We're looking at having regular events here at the Watershed Council building in Petoskey that addresses multiple ages so that you, again, can have more ways of learning about how you can be involved, but also what you can do as an individual to protect our waters.
Yeah, and so do you have any way for people to find out that information or the events that are coming up?
I think a huge part is making sure that you check our Facebook page. Even if you're not a Facebook user, if you don't have an actual Facebook page, you can still go on Facebook and put in Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council and learn on a daily basis some of the events that we have. But our website, again, if you go under events on our website, you can find all the upcoming things happening. And then if you're a member, you will get our calendar and our newsletter, as well as other individual mailings, our annual report that will share all of the dates that are coming up. And we do have a pretty full calendar that's coming together for this year.
Yeah, we have a lot of good information, and so I'd love to have as many people check it out as possible. But this was great, Katie. Once again, thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing from all the people in the community and see what they think about it.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks for joining us for the Watersheds at Work podcast. Be sure to check out our next episode on March 23rd, where we will dive into the history of the Watershed Council. We will cover where we started, what problems and solutions we had, how those have changed and how we have adjusted, and what we hope for in the future to protect our waters. If you're interested in more of our content, check out our icebreakers. On March 22nd, we will be featuring guest speaker David Bucaro, project manager at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who will provide an overview of the newly initiated Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study that seeks to develop more sustainable, resilient coastal communities prepared to adapt to future climate change. To register, go to the events tab on our website. And if you're looking for more ways to get involved with us, check out our social media pages, become a volunteer, or make a donation to help keep our waters clean. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to send us an email at info@watershedcouncil.org.